Hello, I'm George Gonzalez, and I'm obsessed with making games. Today, we are going to go over Playfab, economy, cosmetics, and how to save time so that you can get to selling cosmetic bundles, virtual currency in your games. And today, there was a question that I had for someone in my school community about in-game currency and Playfab. So today, we're going to do that. And at the end of the video, I'm going to show you the code to access these API calls and these items that we're purchasing here. So let's talk about economy first, currency. Here we have a currency called rubies and with the code RB. So currency systems, you can just click on this currency tab. So if you go into the economy on Playfab, after you create your title, you go to legacy. The reason why I'm using legacy over version 2 is that version 2 has changed a lot and you have to use their Microsoft service with Azure. And so there's more steps to get it working. And for the sake of the whole point for me is to start simple and get it working so that you can publish your games. And there's plenty of published games out there that are making tons of money and they're just using this legacy system. So your system for cosmetics, bundles, and game currency doesn't have to be robust. This is enough. Okay, so currencies in here, I hit new currency, I name it whatever I want. You can't use RM because that's used for something else. So that we'll go over in a second. But I don't know if it's bananas, BN. It's just two uppercase characters, rubies, RB, whatever you want to name, gems. So GM for gems. And then we can say gems. The initial deposit, this is specifically when players first create their account, it will give them this initial deposit. So if you want 0, they'll get 0. But if you want to say, hey, give everybody that creates an account 500 gems, you can do that here and you don't have to set up any code. They already have it in their inventory the moment they create their account. So this is nice so that it's global for all the players and you don't have to worry about it. So that's for that. And then recharge rate is if you're using stamina or some kind of system that requires a recharge. So let's say you have some games do stamina, like let's say stamina is used for activities in your game and you use X amount of stamina per thing. And that's you can use it as a currency. Oh, so you're using it. And the max amount of recharge is 120. So you can only hold 120 stamina or 240, whatever you want. And this is the rate that it'll do it per day. So if you want like the full stamina to recover for the whole day, then you can do 240. And so that way you say, hey, if you want to play the game every day you log in, you want to use your 240 stamina, and then in 24 hours, you'll have it back. Or if you want to say recharge rate is 480, that means you can play if you want to log in twice, because this is going to cap at 240. So even if the recharge rate is higher than the maximum, the moment it gets here, the player will just stall, right? And this is for stamina type things, that if you want to say, hey, use this currency as a recharge, that's how it works. And then this units per day recharge rate, I haven't tested it, but I'm sure this is throughout the day. So it'll give you every hour or every minute. I don't know. It depends on like 1 unit at a time, whatever that is, the rate. But it's not like at the end of the day, it'll just give you 240. Okay, so that is set for that. And then when you're ready, you can save it, save the currency. And now we're going to go over catalogs. Catalogs is where your items are at. And some things to keep in mind with catalogs is that you can make multiple catalogs. But for me, one catalog is enough, usually for different reasons. And I'll show you in the code a little bit later. But if you have one catalog, for the most part, you won't have any problems. Usually you just go in here and you can do everything within here. The only reason you might use multiple catalogs is for 2 reasons. One is if you wanted to separate things and you had a purpose for it. If it gets cluttered, usually if you want things to be completely separate. Sometimes also for versioning, like if you have cosmetics and you have an update that's coming up and you want the update to have new cosmetics, you can update this catalog just fine. So it's not like a huge deal to do for versionings. You might think you're being organized, but in the end, it creates more hassle. So usually multiple catalogs, it just depends of what you're doing with your game and if you really need it. The other thing you have to be aware of, if you have different catalogs, these drop tables or stores and containers, if you want something to have, let's say you have weapon catalog and a cosmetic catalog, you can't put them together. And so that's why having one catalog is better, because then when you create these bundles or these containers that have a lot of different items, you can mix match between them. And so usually just have everything in one catalog. unless you have a specific reason. For the most part, you probably won't at the beginning. So just start with one catalog, and then we'll go over now items and bundles. The first thing I want to say is we have in here wizard robe. We can have, and you can see that I have the display name and the item class. The reason I have the item class, let me show you first. You create a new item by here, new item. And in here we can have an item ID. The item ID is kind of the SKU, the thing that makes it unique. So this has to be unique. Usually I try to tie it with whatever the item name is on the game, the resources. But let's say we're gonna do a wizard wand, right? Let's say a wand. I try no spaces, and I make sure the naming convention is the same across, so that because you're gonna need to know the name specifically. Wizard wand, and then we'll go into the code later here, but the item class is very important because this is one of the things that does carry across. Tags don't, item image URL doesn't, description might not. Some of these things don't carry over. And what do I mean by this? I mean that, let me show you. So I have these. So what happens is you have an inventory item in a catalog. Let's say this is the catalog item. When the player purchased the item, it is now an item. It's a player item instance, which is different than this. Even though it's the same item, it has different properties, and I'll show you that later. But I just wanted you to make sure that you understand that difference. And we'll talk more about it as you go along. But I typically, if you want this wizard one to say, let's say you have cosmetics for your hands, for your head, for belt, how do you separate those? Well, you can separate them in the game. That's just fine. You don't even need anything here. But if you wanted to categorize them, and I'll show you, you can use this item class. This is where I categorize what something is from. Okay, so we have the description, tags. If you want, you can use them. If you want a store and you want to sell by tags, that's fine. Just don't use tags for something that you want in here. So if you want it in the player and in the inventory, you want to use this item class. Okay, oh, sorry. You want to use this item class right here. Okay, so this is what you want to use for your need. If you want to use it in both, tags is good for the shop only. Okay, for shop items, and same for the image. If you want to like grab an image from somewhere. Okay, stackable is if you want to own multiple of these. You have an item count, and I'll show you later where in the code. It's tradable if you want to trade, but usually stackable is fine. And you can, I would say, I never used the trading system in Playfab. I'll probably create my own instead. Limited edition is a token for character creation. You can do a lot of things with here. But the main idea is usually these I leave off unless I really want stackables if you want multiple versions of the same. Durable and consumable. The durable means you keep it forever. Consumable means that you consume it, like a health potion or a currency. Sometimes, like if you have like a loot box and it gives you something, we'll talk about it later. Okay, so you have durable, it's there. Then it's an item, and then the currency price. This is let's say if we want it for rubies or for gem, it costs like maybe 100 rubies and 1,000 gems. I don't know, it doesn't matter. And so then now you can buy this item for either one. But the main thing about this is that you don't have to deal with the currency exchange. Is that when you select purchase, Playfab will ask the player, like if the currency, like let's say a player hacks and says, give me this item for this many rubies, for 0 rubies or 0 gems. The transaction won't happen because the player has to give up that currency amount. Okay, so this is good for anti-cheating stuff because it handles it on its own. It doesn't mean the player can't cheat. There's other ways to cheat, but for this part, it's actually nice because then they can't just grant themselves items unless you select the API that lets them do that. Okay, but what about currency? Let's say you want to buy 1,000 rubies for $5 or $4.99. Okay, so this is how we set it up. We go to bundles. So we go bundles, and you create a new bundle, and let's do a different one. Let's say 5,000 rubies, 5,000 rubies, and we're gonna do it for $10. So 5,000 rubies. We don't need any of this. We're gonna set it to consumable. So the idea with this is that this is it says bundle, a package, let's say, and you can decide how this package is handled the moment the player grabs it or owns it. Okay, because in the player inventory, the player owns this item, so it's another type of item. Okay, so here item type bundle. So you have to think about: do you want to have the player always own this item? Do you want it to be durable? Or do you want to consume? And typically these bundles are consumable because they have stuff in there. So And then you're like, okay, how am I gonna unwrap this item the moment I own it? And the best way, you can either by an API call consume it and grab all the stuff inside of it, or you could just do it by default and Playfab handles the rest. It's usually 3 seconds because you either 2 or 3 seconds. You don't want to have it less than that because of errors and stuff. So anyway, so in 3 seconds it'll consume it, and that way the player, the moment they buy this bundle and you give it to them, they own it, it opens up, and they have everything inside and done. So you don't have to do anything. They'll get everything in the bundle, and the bundle will be removed from the inventory, and it'll be in the history. But the best thing is that it gives them everything. And so it interacts the way you would think it would. So if you have specific needs with your bundles that you want to do for some reason you want to do it differently, you can use these. You can stack them. You can have them durable, so they always own them. So you know maybe how many times they bought that bundle, if that's something that you want to keep track of, or you can just keep it track on the back end without. You don't have to do this, but it's up to you to do whatever you want with this. This is usually how I set it up. You add an item to the bundle, and you can add, for example, the wizard wand, the wizard robe, and the 1,000 rubies. But in this scenario, we have, so this is the 1,000 rubies is the other bundle. So you can have bundles within bundles. Currencies. So then I can give it rubies and gems. And so I can say this gives you 5,000, 50,000 gems and 5,000 rubies, or whatever I want, right? And I save the bundle. Oh, and I have to add in here, it doesn't have to cost anything because I can grant it to them. So real money. So usually for Steam, if you're working with Steam, this is $9.99, and the cents are in there. If you wanted to make it $10, it's $9.99. If you wanted to make it 100, it's $99.99. $50, 49, like 99. But you don't add the dot. You just do it like that. And when you do the transaction on Steam, I have another video where I show this, but yeah, you can do in-app purchases with the Steam that way, and Playfab does really nice stuff where it just makes it so much easier. You don't have to do anything, just that. And then let's say it's 0 rubies. So usually I say 0 rubies because I grant it to them, and I only do it if they purchase the bundle. And so this is how you would do bundles on Playfab. So we have rubies for in-app purchases, currency, in-game currency, and then we have also cosmetics with in-game currency. Now I'm going to show you the code and kind of give you hopefully a high overview of how it all works now that you understand how to set this up on Playfab. So in here we have, when you grab the player inventory, so let's say we get the player inventory. Sometimes we get the currency. So this is how you get the currency. Usually I store it somewhere, but you have results and you have virtual currency, and you have the 2 letters, AC, MR. So these are for like arcane coins and something else. I forgot what it was. Magic rubies or something. Anyway, so we have the Playfab ID, and here in this one, we are actually not only loading the currency, but we're also loading all the items. And the way you do that is when you get the request, you have a result, and this result holds the virtual currency and has the inventory. And so you go through this iteration, and these are item instance. Okay, so this is different than the items on this. So this is specifically for the player. These are items the player owns. Okay. So once you purchase an item, you can sift through them. And this is what I was talking about, is that if you look at here, if I type in backend item, you notice that if I do tag, there's no tags. There's no custom tag. There's custom data. There's item ID, item class. And that's why I said, if you are trying to make sure, like, see, I have item class. In here, I add the item by ID and class. And if you had, and you notice you can also have an int for remaining uses. If you have like an amount of uses that if you have like multiple pieces of the same item. But anyway, so in here we have items, and in here I have a switch case for the type. So if it's a row pattern, or if it's a pattern, or belts, or hoodies, scarves, robes, hats, I have a different list. So if you wanted to do it this way, you could, based on the type. Okay. The main thing with that is that you have to understand that they all have to have some kind of class. If they don't have a class, they don't go into the specific. That's up to you. You could. There's other ways of doing it if you want. You can have the game read in the item ID and have its own and find it, and then that item has what class it is, because it's a unique ID anyway. So you can do that through that. So you don't really have to do this if you don't want to. I'm just showing you how you can use that data. Now the other thing that you might want to use for purchase. Let's go down here. For making a purchase, okay? Usually what I do at first is make sure that I don't try to make a purchase multiple times in a row, because sometimes that might happen if people accidentally press the button twice. So this is like a safeguard. Here is the purchase transaction. As you notice, we have the catalog version. If you don't, you can omit this. You can comment this out just fine, and it'll work, because that's the only catalog. If you have multiple catalogs, it's important to make sure clarify which catalog you are accessing. This is the item ID of the item I'm trying to purchase, the virtual currency that I'm using to purchase that, and the cost. Okay, so you send all this information to Playfab, and Playfab will then do the transaction with the player. And if the player doesn't have enough coins, they'll reject that. That's why I have the error message, or you don't have enough arcane coins, or there's an error because the item is not sold for this type of currency, maybe, or there's no item in the catalog. There's multiple reasons why it would fail. But if it goes through, I load the inventory, and that's how I go back to what we just saw, where I load the inventory of everything the player has, and I should have that in there now. Okay, so that is the logic of, and hopefully that helps you understand and save you headaches, because oftentimes what happened is I would put stuff in the tags or the custom data, and then I would try to load it when I load the inventory in here, and I would have problems because I couldn't access it on the player. And you got to understand this behavior in here, that player items and player inventory items, they're different. Even though they have some classes, the last thing that I want to talk about is that if I change, let's say I purchase this wand, and then later I decide to either change the price or change the class to be wands or whatever, like if I change anything in here on Playfab for that item, is not going to change for the player. This doesn't update all the items that the players have. And so you have to be aware when you're updating on Playfab is that if I update the inventory item, it's not going to retroactively update all these items in here. And so you have to be aware of these two things, is that Playfab will not go to the trouble of like updating all these. Hey, this item changed, so now change all these. So if you do want to do that, where you change an item, don't change the backend on Playfab, change the item in the game, and it will retroactively change everything. So you have to be aware when you're messing around with this. The description is not going to be on the other one anyway, so it's okay. But oftentimes that's confusing, because sometimes you think that they're connected, because when you go into the players, you'll see that they have this item, but there's something wrong with it in the game. And so just be aware. This is like a huge gotcha for me, because you're like debugging and you can't understand what's going on. And then you got to understand that there's item instances for the player and there's items for the inventory item. Okay, then they're two separate and they have different information. They're not the same and they're not connected like they are on the back end. Okay, hopefully that helps you understand about Playfab and how to do that in Unity maybe, or in whatever game you are working on. If you have any questions, I missed something, let me know. I'm here to help you finish your games and actually publish. We'll see you in the next video.